Well, I think we have everybody that we'll have tonight. So wanted to welcome everybody attending our Hawks Prairie Business District Zoning Text Amendment Informational Open House. My name is Ryan Andrews. I'm Planning Manager in the Community and Economic Development Department with the City of Lacey. I'll be hosting and moderating tonight's informational session. The way the session will work is that first we'll have a city staff presentation on a zoning text amendment that has been submitted by a private applicant. So this is a private application. And so Jessica Brandt, our associate planner, will be providing some background and some context as far as what the actual application entails. We'll next then have an applicant presentation. Our applicant representative tonight is Michael Kershiznik. Michael is project manager with Thomas Architecture Studios and represents Hogan Bay Mixed Use LLC, who is the applicant for the zoning text to be amended. So Michael will provide some information from the applicant's perspective. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period. So this is your opportunity as the public to be able to ask either city staff or the applicant themselves and get a little bit more detail in terms of what the application might entail and get a little bit more information and get those questions answered. If you do have questions, the best way to get those answered is to use the chat box for questions. Use that Q&A function, type in your questions, and that can be done at any time throughout the webinar. So you can do that at any time. If somebody has a question, feel free to enter those in, and at the end we'll get to those all those questions that you have. And if for some reason you're not able to attend the entire webinar, or if you hear from neighbors maybe that were interested but weren't able to attend, we are recording this and it will be available on the city's YouTube channel for later viewing. So if you do go to YouTube, just search up City of Lacey and you'll find this video hosted probably within the next day or two. So with that, again, introduce Jessica Brandt, our associate planner, to head up the city staff presentation part of the webinar. So Jessica, take it away.
Great, thanks, Ryan. I'm gonna roll through some slides with you. So I'm gonna turn my video off while we do that, and then we'll come back for the Q&A. So we're all on the screen again. There we go. Well, I'm Jessica Brandt. I'm an associate planner with the City of Lacey. I do long-range planning. And so my role tonight is to really just provide some background information for you and introduce you to the Lacey zoning code, the Hawks Prairie Business District, and then just kind of roll that over to Michael to provide some more information about the amendment itself and what that would mean. And so we have, before I even get into the details, I'll just say this is an information only session. We're really here just to kind of show you a little bit about the proposal, take your questions. We're not making any decisions tonight. This isn't a formal public hearing or a formal comment. This is truly just a voluntary open house essentially. So we can just informally share information and answer your questions. And so if you need to get hold of me, this is my email, jbrant@ci.lacey.wa.us. And if you would like to attend the formal public hearing with the Planning Commission, that is currently scheduled for April 20th at 4 p.m. And if you're registered tonight, I'll automatically put you on an email notice so you can get that information. So let's talk a little bit about a zoning text amendment and what that is, because that is what is being requested tonight. And a zoning text amendment is a requested change in permitted uses across an entire zoning district. Well, let's start with zoning. What is zoning? If you're not familiar, zoning creates districts that define permitted and prohibited uses in an area. And so for the Hawks Prairie Business District, the property owner, the applicant, is requesting a change of permitted uses on all properties within that zoning. And so this time there's no projects, there's no development proposed for any properties in the Hawks Prairie Business District. It's really just this request for redesignating the permitted uses so that sometime in the future, if an application comes in, those potentially new uses would apply. And any project that does come in the future would go through land development process through the City of Lacey. It would be dictated by our requirements in our city code and our public works and development guidelines. And so once again, this is a zoning text amendment. It's a request in a change in permitted uses. And that process goes something like this. It starts with an application that comes into the city, staff reviews it, and then it goes on to the city's planning commission. And they go through a formal public hearing process, but we sort of inserted this step just to give information to the community, which is just giving you information. And so when you want to formally comment on April 20th, if you so choose, you'll have a little bit more information, a little more time to digest that information. And then once the planning commission has a public hearing, they take public input, they make their recommendation to the city council whether to move on that amendment or not. And if it does move on to the city council, then they would have to make a decision to adopt that amendment as well. And that is potentially scheduled in for May or June, depending on city council schedule. So here's a little bit of an orientation to the city of Lacey. If you're not familiar or haven't looked at a city map for a while, just want to give you a sense of where we are. So this is the north end of Lacey up here in Puget Sound. Basically, we got Jubilee to the north and Horizon Point to the south. And then this is I-5 right here. And so the area we're really talking about tonight is in this dotted line, kind of right here. This is the Hawks Prairie Business District. And so when you see this map, the green part represents city of Lacey, city limits, and then this purple area is the Lacey urban growth area. Just so you're kind of getting oriented here to what all these colorful lines mean. And this red right here is the city of Olympia. So zooming in on Hawks Prairie Business District, this dotted line represents the borders of that district. And Hawks Prairie Business District actually has two sub-districts within it. So Hawks Prairie Business District, Business Commercial, and Hawks Prairie Business District, Commercial. I'm not going to say that 5 times in a row. And so what that really means is that this whole area is the Hawks Prairie Business District, and then these two sub-districts within it have just some nuances with their permitted uses and a little bit of differences. And so to orient you, if you can't kind of tell where you are here, here is the Diverging Diamond Interchange, I-5 right here. You can see Britton Parkway kind of curves along right here. Here's Marvin Road. So this area down here is kind of where Costco and Home Depot are. Cabela's is about right here. You can kind of come up Marvin Road. There's that first roundabout. There's that second roundabout. Just so you kind of get oriented to where the Hawks Prairie Business District is. And so all these colorful areas represent our zoning map, and they represent different permitted uses in different areas. So this red is our general commercial area. This purple around here is our light industrial zoning area. The green is open space institutional. This more orangey yellowy colors you'll see right here. This is residential, kind of moderate density. And then this is community office, this little square right here. So generally Hawks Prairie Business District is bordered on the south by I-5, on the east with industrial, to the north some residential, and then just a little bit of everything over here on this side, a lot of residential and kind of mineral extraction area. Here's Woodard Creek for you, just to get you oriented to where you are. So this area, the planning for this area really dates back to the early 90s, and the city of Lacey has a comprehensive plan with many kind of planning areas within it, so sub-area plans. And one is the Northeast Area Planning element, and that really laid out since the early 90s, just what is the vision for this area? What are we planning this to look like? Because that helps us plan for infrastructure, parks, and then we can really try to get that balance of commercial, business, residential, and make sure our transportation corridors are all fitting within that vision. And so everything in our zoning code right now is really tied back to this sub-area plan from 91 and 92. And so when you look at the vision for the Hawks Prairie Business District, as it's currently written in the Lacey Municipal Code, in the current zoning code, it's really kind of highlights a few things. I didn't put the entire zoning code in there for you. You can certainly look up on the City of Lacey website. But it's really about encouraging development of an integrated planned community where people can and want to, or are able to, don't have to, but are able to live and work. They have residential compatible businesses, close proximity to each other. Everything is, the idea is to make the development site sensitive. As you know, there's kind of some interesting topography out there. encourage originality, flexibility, innovation. Really, it's kind of meant to be an area that is pedestrian bicycle oriented with access to mass transit. And so it provides, the vision is to have alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. And ultimately that really adds up to kind of this mixed use concept. And that's really been the vision for the Hawks Prairie Business District for the last 30 years or so. And so I'm going to pass it over to Michael to talk a little bit more about what does this mixed use concept mean and what does that really look like. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Michael.
Okay, thanks, Jessica.
You bet.
So I am Michael Krzyznik. I am a senior project manager with Thomas Architecture Studios, and I am the representative for Hogan Bay Town Center LLC, which is the applicant for the text amendment. And kind of to start off and just touch on what a mixed-use district is and what that concept entails. It really, in the Northeast Plan, it focused or focused the attention of making this area kind of like a future downtown. And there really are 5 types of land uses that make up a vibrant mixed use district. And they sustain that same mixed use district. They are employment, entertainment, housing, civic, and commercial services. And when you have a good mix of those 5 types of uses, that really brings the vibrancy of that area together, and it also provides for a great deal of resiliency in allowing that area to weather, whether it's a market change or a commercial change in the weather. It also provides for a lot of connectivity between the different uses and allows somebody to live and work in one area, and is really part of placemaking for a city. If we can go to the next slide. So the amended proposal that we put forward did a couple things. It did 3 basic things. One was we are requesting that in the Hawks Prairie Business District C zone that there would be allowed medical and dental services in a multi-tenant building. This was a little bit different than just a global allowing medical and dental services. We're really talking more about those kind of services that would be in a small building like a clinic, a single doctor's clinic, or a dentist clinic, or something along the lines of a urgent care clinic type of thing. We also have requested that residential uses be allowed in the Hawks Prairie Business District C zone. Right now, residential uses are allowed in the BC zone, just not in the C zone. And then also we asked to increase the residential density allowed on smaller parcels, specifically to parcels less than 20 acres or less. The intent of that really is to make the entire Hawks Prairie Business District zone a mixed-use development, because you bring in that residential component and you also allow those kind of service uses that support a residential living in that area. This also allows for the growth in commercial and residential needs in this area to be met more efficiently. This also fits in with the historical vision for this district, obviously hearkening back to the 91 or the Northeast Area Plan. Next. So literally looking at those 3 requests that we made for the proposal, we're looking at what's existing and what we have proposed. So in the Hawks Prairie Business District, business and commercial area does allow medical uses. So what we're proposing would not change any of that. In the Hawks Prairie, I'm going to start saying HPBDC, does not allow for medical uses at present. So the proposal would be to allow for medical uses in a multi-tenant building. I think that's important to point out. So the HPBDBC allows for residential uses right now, like I said, if they are in a mixed-use context, which basically is a building with both residential and commercial uses in it, or if those residential buildings are within 1,000 feet of a commercial use. So for that district, there would be nothing that would change with this proposal. Within the C part of the district, does not allow residential right now. So if we were to change with this text amendment, it would allow for residential, same as in the BC district, and would have to meet the same requirements of the BC district. And then as far as the density limits that are in this proposal, right now the limits to density are only 20 units per acre on 10% of a parcel. So what we're really looking at is anything over 20 acres would remain the same there in both the districts, but if you were 20 acres or smaller, you wouldn't have that 10% limit on that parcel. And if I could, so the vision here really is to create that vibrant, integrated planned community throughout the Hawks Prairie Business District. And it should be noted that even with these changes, all of the design standards and requirements of the Hawks Prairie Business District would still be in place and would have to be met. Things like parking or landscaping or a lot of the pedestrian amenities, transportation, all of that would have to be met by these and would not change any of those aspects of that area. Now, I put together a quick, what would this mean in the scope of a 20-acre site? So if you had a 20-acre site in the Hawks Prairie Business District, and this amendment was incorporated into the zoning, basically what you would get or could get up to is about 65,000 square feet of retail, restaurants, services, office kind of space. And with that, it would also allow for about 360 total dwelling units on that 20 acres. Let's go to the next slide. So kind of understanding that and also looking at market conditions right now as they sit for the Hawks Prairie District and basically for Lacey in general. Right now, obviously everybody understands that COVID-19 has really been a disruption to retail in the entire globe. But with that, a lot of this area, the big box retail stores have saturated, that market is saturated. We're not going to see a lot of big box retail stores coming in. What that means is that there's also a higher demand for those small footprint retail stores or small footprint service leased spaces that we can put out there. And the residential demand is still very strong for the Lacey area. So with those two things, both the high demand for small footprint and the strong demand for residential, to be able to bring those together in a area where they're in proximity to each other, they have both access to transit as well as can be used as a bike can get you from home to your dental appointment, or you can take a walk and you can go out to dinner versus having to hop in a car and go. And so that experiential entertainment, hospitality will come back to this area as well down the road, but it will come back. And so ultimately, with all of those uses that we talked about before, the 5 uses, if the more of those you can get, the more your design really has a resiliency and a vibrancy for that area. And I'll go to the next one. So I'll hand this back to Ryan at this point.
Thank you, Jessica and Michael, for great presentations. At this point, if you do have questions, this is the time to use that Q&A box of the webinar to get additional information. I see that we do have a couple questions that have come through. I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear on this, and there may be confusion on the part of others as well, is that, and I think some of the confusion lies with there being 2 subzones within a zoning district. Jessica, maybe you could help provide a little bit of information as far as, there's two primary requests. One is related to the medical and one is related to the residential. Can you maybe touch on a little bit of the vision and maybe why we haven't, as a city, allowed for medical uses in the commercial zone as well as residential uses in the commercial zone until this point, until we're looking at it right now?
Sure. Well, I think what's interesting about the Hawks Prairie Business District is, despite the fact that the Hawks Prairie Business District business commercial has allowed residential since it was part of the zoning code, there's still no residential out there. And then the limit on the commercial side with having kind of that more medical use, I think the original vision for that area was a really kind of more of a commercial center, kind of what you're seeing on the south side of I-5 there. And so we're really trying to figure out how do we make this whole area a mixed use. And so you don't get really large monolithic buildings of just like a big new hospital or a very large building that just has medical in it. We're really trying to get more of a balance of uses in the entire district, whether it's in that business commercial or the commercial side. And so I think that's really kind of been the goal here for this area. And I'm happy to bring up the maps again if we need to look at all where, kind of there's two districts, one's a little bigger, one's a little smaller, but if we ever need to bring those up, I can certainly do that too.
Yeah, and the commercial area is, again, that area that's on the eastern side of those two zones. So it's the area around the Marvin Road, Britton Parkway, kind of, yeah, maybe bring that up and we can, yeah, we can take a look at it. So really, the focus of the amendments are around that Marvin Road, yep, around the two roundabouts, yep, and on either side of that. So you have the roundabouts at Main Street, and then the roundabout at Britton Parkway as well. So the amendments are focused really around that area. And I think, Jessica, you put it really well that I think originally the city was very worried that the commercial area would be taken up by two things: either medical, big monolithic medical uses, a hospital or something like that, and preclude ourselves from the additional commercial that we would need to support our city through sales tax dollars and those kinds of things. But additionally, residential as well. The fear was that if residential was allowed in this area, again, that we wouldn't be able to get the sales tax dollars, that the revenue that we needed to operate as a city. Plus, you've got such great access from the interchange there that, it really lends itself well to the commercial. And according to what Michael's saying, and, what those changing market dynamics have to say is that, well, really, if you want commercial in this market, then you're going to really need the residential to go with it. That, the days of the big box retailer, the Walmarts, the Costco's, the Targets, they're really not expanding at this point. Those models are, if they are expanding, it's going to the e-commerce model and not to the brick and mortar model. And so if we're going to look, to the future of this area and what it means for more commercial uses, then it's going to have to come hand in glove with more residential. So that, Jessica, a question here, I think probably be best to ask you, yeah, is how does this rezoning fit in the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan?
Oh, that's an interesting connection. I'm glad somebody made that. I think it intersects in a few ways. I mean, when you kind of zoom out a little bit and think of what we're trying to do up here with creating walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented neighborhoods, that right there ties back to greenhouse gas emissions, compact development, where you have higher density where people can live and work and play in the same area and they don't have to drive. I think that's a huge component of it. I mean, really, when you think about what we're trying to do in general with our State Growth Management Act, we're really trying to create boundaries of where we have development and then where we don't have development. And as we're trying to focus the development in our cities, that means we can save things on the outside of the city for agriculture and forestry and trees. I think too, we have tree protection, standards in Lacey for new development. And so if anybody is a developing property with trees on them, they have to go through our standards and make sure there's tree tracks set aside and replant trees. And I mean, that's just part and parcel of what we do every day. But I think the main intersection really that I'm thinking of off the top of my head is really on that compact land use development and transportation intersection.
Another question, and I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. I think you touched on a little bit, Jessica, is maybe you could talk a little bit about tree protection regulations and how they would apply. Obviously, at this point, there is no project, but if and when a project is poised to move forward, how would the tree protection regulations apply here?
Sure, right. There's no project, but let's pretend something came in the door. We would apply the existing Lacey tree regulations, and so for tree tract requirements, there would be 5%. They would protect important trees. They would be part of the site design. There would also be a lot of landscaping requirements and probably a lot of tree replanting. And so street tree on the boulevards, if there's, let's say, parcels for residential, for example, we have tree density minimums for those. So I think there's always that trade-off with development where you kind of lose existing trees, but you plant new trees, which are actually more appropriate for our urban environment. And then we get to save the trees on the outside of the city because the development is going in the city. And it's like anything, you know, it's, you don't want to swing one way or the other too far with saving all trees or cutting down all trees. And we always try to balance that in between with how do you kind of, you know, trees and growth. It's a constant balancing act. But I think the growth management really says a lot. What we're trying to figure out, we're saving our urban trees, but we also have to make room for all the people that want to live in Lacey.
So a question here, and maybe Michael can help on this one too, is that we've lived here for 10 years. In that time, we've had continual residential and warehouses. How can we keep adding more residential without a grocery store on this side of the freeway? Maybe Michael, I'll turn it over to you to help answer this one. As far as, you know, what does the zoning text amendment, you know, do for, you know, a potential, you know, commercial uses, maybe like a grocery store or something like that. You know, I often hear that, you know, in order to get a grocery store, we need to have rooftops, and rooftops mean, you know, dwelling units in close proximity to those types of uses. Maybe Michael, you can help touch on that a little bit as far as how that might encourage something like a grocery store to locate in this area.
Sure, and I think you really have kind of outlined the basic premise, and that is most grocery stores are going to be looking at an area to how many houses are they providing services to, and then they're taking up an area and saying, hey, we can go into that area and provide a grocery store. Now, the most, you know, basically what we're kind of putting forward as a text amendment is to have more residential density in that area, which means that basically it's going to a development that comes in and say the 20 acre one that we were talking about as a model, 360 dwellings in, you know, an area just in a 20 acre site in that area. That's a huge, or that's a big chunk of something that a grocery store would look at. And right now, I believe, if I remember correctly, the Northeast plan called for about 1,200 units in the Hawks Prairie area. And right now, as Jessica pointed out, there are none in that area right now. There is some to the north now in the residential zone, the medium residential zone that's to the northwest of the Hawks Prairie site. So you are getting residential uses out there that will draw the grocery store to that zone, to that area, I should say.
Yeah, and we do have, you know, the Hawks Prairie Business District zone would certainly allow for a grocery store to locate there. You know, we have everything in place. We have the zoning that works. We have the utilities are available. We have, you know, the transportation system. At this point, you know, we've done everything that the city can do. The city doesn't build grocery stores. We've done everything in our power to grease the skids for somebody who could. And so, you know, in order to have those types of services, as Michael mentioned, you have to have the unit counts high enough to be able to support those. And our hope is that by doing something like the zoning text amendment to encourage more, more rooftops, more household units, then that would encourage a grocery store to look at this area. Now, grocery stores, and I've talked to the folks in Jubilee many times about, wanting to get a grocery store out in this area. And I think the first person that does will just, the first company that puts a grocery store on the north side of I-5 is really going to be high-fiving themselves from the moment they do, because it's not only wouldn't, not only capture the area that's in Lacey here, but all the way out. This is really a crossroads of a sort. We have residents all the way out Johnson Point that would take advantage of a grocery store here, so close to without having to go on the other side of I-5. And so I think it would be really successful. It's just the private market that would need to be able to support that, and take at this point the risk to be able to do that. But my feeling is that it'll happen. We don't know when, but it'll happen.
Yeah, so can I add to that, Ryan? I think one of the things that you kind of touched on is also just the location to I-5 and the ability for not only people, that if a grocery store goes out there, yes, they may be serving people to the north, but that it does have that connection to I-5 that would draw other people to that area to shop there. So it's a very, very favorable location in my mind.
Jessica, question here. Can you clarify the residential density portion? It sounded as if under 20 acres, trying to make more dense than larger parcels. So we've got a parcel threshold of those smaller parcels that would not have a density limit versus those larger parcels that would have a density limit. Why would that be?
Oh, good question. And this is something we've talked about too as this proposal came in. And so let's go back to this idea that the original proposal for this northeast area, the vision was what, 1,200 units or so. Currently there are none. Under current zoning, I think I wrote down 500, and about half that amount are currently allowed. And so we were trying to decide, okay, if we want to increase residential out here, but not have it over proliferate, how do we do that? And so we thought if we apply a higher density to smaller parcels, it creates enough incentive that would actually pencil out for a developer, and Michael can touch on that too. And so then you look at the larger parcels, if it's greater than 20 acres, if we're only limiting a 20-acre site and only 10% of it can have that density on it, that really prevents that over proliferation of residential in this district. So we can keep that balance of uses. And so we thought that was kind of a good compromise to still reach that vision of 1,200 units for this whole district, but not have it all in one big area or have a really large 90-acre parcel be all residential, for example. Yeah. And so Michael can touch on, where's that sweet spot with the 20 acres and why are we talking about that?
Yeah, and I think that I would jump in there too and say that it would be very hard for it right now, the way the zoning is written, if you were to just say, hey, it's going to be the same 10%, 20 units on 10% of the site on a 20-acre parcel. Well, you're talking 40 residential units on a 20-acre parcel. Be very hard for anybody to make that pencil out to actually want to put residential in that kind of thing. So then you start separating out, and all of a sudden there's less residential and just more commercial, and you're not getting that mix of the district that you really want, so that the people living there can actually walk to work or walk to restaurants, that kind of thing. The 20-acre kind of sweet spot that Jessica was saying was basically looking at it and saying, if you're 20 acres and you have 20 units per acre, that particular balance of units for that amount of area really is something that a developer will look at and say, okay, that pencils out that my land costs, my costs in developing per door actually work out because I'm buying this 20-acre lot and I'm dividing it over this many dwelling units and this much commercial space.
So question, maybe Jessica, you can help, and I can certainly help chime in on this as well. And before I go to the question, if anybody else has any additional questions, feel free to get them in the Q&A at this point. It'd be a good time to get those in. The area north is now being filled with warehouse space. the proposal wants to add more medical facilities, 65,000 feet of retail, and add entertainment. Warehouse use, medical use, retail use, all adds to traffic and congestion. What is the proposal to handle all the additional traffic that would be created by this activity?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so I'll zoom out again and talk a little bit about the Northeast Area Plan. And that was really, the intention was to plan all of the infrastructure for the proposed uses out there, for industrial, for commercial, for residential. And so all the big corridors and the roads out there, they're planned for that high capacity. And so because the roads in their area are really built for that anticipated 1,200 units and we're still at zero, that's kind of been planned for and built into the infrastructure out there. And I think as it transitions to more of a mixed use, I mean, I would anticipate fewer cars in general. And so we can talk a little bit about traffic counts associated with multifamily development, like apartment buildings versus commercial uses. And they're just calculated a little different. And when you think of an apartment building, for example, the traffic in the morning might be a little bit higher, kind of those like peak commute hours. But if it's commercial, it'll be busier in the evenings and on the weekends. And so it really depends on the time of day as well. But really that area has been planned for that intensive development since the 90s. And so the roads and sewer and infrastructure, everything associated has been planned along with that. And so I think it's just this idea of maybe when it gets more filled in with mixed use, that traffic pattern might change a little bit too. And Ryan, feel free to add a little bit extra to that if you have more, kind of background.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, the request is really kind of twofold. One is the medical use. Maybe we could touch on the medical uses. Is that, the medical uses that would be allowed under the zoning text amendment that aren't allowed now would be those types of like storefront medical uses. So those are things like that would go in a tenant space in a commercial area. So that's going to be like a dentist's office or an urgent care clinic, maybe a small doctor's office or something like that. It's not going to be a large medical facility. So, those types of uses are generating traffic, but they're generating traffic, with a kind of an office type use, less than a intensive medical use that would have, ambulances and hospital rooms and those kinds of things. So make sure that, when we're clear about this, is that this medical would allow medical uses, but they're more storefront medical uses and not, large medical facilities. On the residential side, Jessica's correct in that it does create a little bit of a change in dynamic from how, when those peak hours of traffic generation would occur. We've planned this area for 30 years to have 1,200 residential units. And as Michael mentioned, I don't think we have one yet. And so, we're primed and ready to handle 1,200 additional residential units in this area. And the streets are sized to handle those. And the thing is, like I said, is that not so much that, the volume of traffic would be much different. It's going to be the hours. It's going to be, somebody that's driving in a car, first thing in the morning to work, 7:30 in the morning, gone during the day, coming back, between 5 and 6, 7 o'clock at night. That's going to be a lot different than somebody that's going to be, accessing a commercial location, which is going to be mostly in the evenings and the weekends, as Jessica mentioned. Jessica, maybe this question for you. How does this integrate with the recent zoning change to allow larger warehouses?
Well, do you want me to put the map up at all? Well, I guess we could just talk about it first. I mean, I think the idea is that we're trying to figure out this Northeast area, how do we have our codes really match the vision for that and also provide flexibility to the market. I think when you talk about, I think we talk about the triangle of development and what has to happen for a successful development. And it's, you need to have a property owner, you need to have market conditions, and you need to have city setting the stage with their zoning codes for things to happen. And if one of those is missing, it just doesn't happen. And I guess I'm thinking of warehouses out there. They're really trying to provide almost a kind of a spectrum of sizes and shapes. So if you're a person just starting out and you need a small space, you can find that. And then when you start growing, you can upgrade to a bigger space. And then when you grow from there, you can upgrade to an even bigger space. And it's really providing a variety of spaces out there. And then as far as the larger ones, I guess I'm trying to figure out if is that reply that's really about that recent one, Ryan, that we worked on. And I'm trying to figure out what the question is about that.
Yeah, maybe if a person with a question has, if we're not addressing it here, maybe a follow-up. But really, when it comes to the large warehouse type development, there is essentially one site left in Northeast Lacey to handle a building of about 500,000 square feet. And that is the Hill Betty Business Park. So west of Marvin Road, north of Britton Parkway. That's kind of in the area. There's some small tenant buildings in there, kind of around the area where the former driving range, the Hickory Stick driving range was, and Evelyn Betty's former homestead site there. And so really there isn't any other place in Northeast Lacey where a large warehouse could go. And so maybe it'll give people some peace of mind that, really once that site's been developed, there are no other large warehouse buildings or sites for warehouse buildings available. And so really, I think if it's the concerns on traffic or impacts, then, what you see out there today, it really isn't going to change much. I also wanted to make sure that we're focusing in on that Northeast area plan. That really set the stage back in the early 90s as far as what this area should be back when the city first annexed the property. The request is consistent with the Northeast area plan, and that Northeast area plan set the stage for the various land uses that you see out there today, including the light industrial. So, it may appear that, these are decisions that are made, without meaningful input, without plans in place, but we've had plans in place for the last 30 years that said this is the way this area is supposed to develop. And I think far and away it has. So, maybe if people want, we can, I believe the Northeast area plan is on our website. I'd have to check that. It's available for folks to take a look at if you want. So I've got one last question. We've got about 15 minutes left. If people have additional questions, feel free to type them in and we'll get to those. We have one left. If we don't get anybody else, then we'll have to sign off for the evening. So the last question I have right now is, are there height limitations on the buildings proposed in this amendment? So what is the current height limitation in the zone? Jessica, maybe you could touch on that. And then Michael, maybe you could talk a little bit about what the product would be as far as the type of buildings that would be kind of in that kind of mixed use concept, what the buildings would look like. So Jessica, do you want to start talking about the height limitation?
Like I know it off the top of my head.
Well, spoiler alert, I could tell you there is no height limitation in the Hawks Prairie Business District.
But I was having a second guess myself. So
yes, there is no height limitation. Go ahead.
No, I was going to caveat it with there is no height limit, but I think Michael could really comment on what would be the most potentially possible project if it ever came to fruition. What would be the reality out there, even though there currently is no height limit on buildings? I think that was probably more interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that even though there is no height limit out there, and we're talking about a density that's going to raise the number of units that you could put on any site under 20 acres, there's still plenty of requirements that you have to meet with those buildings, be it parking, be it landscaping, be it pedestrian ways and that kind of stuff, that is going to model a certain type of building that would go into that area. Specifically, you're looking at a 4 to 5 story building with commercial on the first floor and 3 to 4 floors of residential above is really kind of the extent to which you could go height-wise and still be able to meet all of the standing requirements of the design code for that area right now. The other thing is at least with the commercial side of things, if it's strictly commercial, once again, you're still in a situation where you're meeting. If you meet all the requirements, you're talking, single floor commercial, unless it's in a mixed use kind of building pattern that I just spoke of previously.
Thanks, but I think that's an important distinction. Just because this area is really meant for some density, I think it's because it's a really long range plan that implies that over time, who knows, in 50 years, maybe we'll get a skyscraper in Lacey, but it's definitely not going to happen tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so I think Michael really nailed it with, there's this thing that's permitted, but what would really be the likely scenario based on market conditions? And I think a 4 to 5 story building is about it.
Yeah, and I'm a really visual person, and when I think about the type of development, I'm kind of, and Michael, I want to ask your opinion on this. I'm kind of thinking like, DuPont, right around that interchange at Center Drive. Is that kind of something that is, that's mixed use, retail first floor, residential above? Is that kind of what, the product type that we'd be looking at?
A lot of the stuff that you see in that area that you're talking about in DuPont, I would point to a number of the projects that we're doing in downtown Olympia right now, which it's the Lorana that went in, or some of you might know 321, the Lofts or Annie's Market Flats. Those are all basically a 4 to 5 story building with commercial on the first floor and residential above. And you're really looking for that density to kind of give that perspective that you have in the DuPont of a community being built out there, and a way to live there, and also without a car if you wanted to, quite frankly, because the services would be within walking or transit distance from you. It's an urban, I should say this, it's definitely an urban approach to the area. It basically is looking for that density of not only residents, but commercial services, and also the entertainment civic part of it that would be the kind of your exterior spaces.
Great. So looks like we did get another question. If you do have others, we have about 10 minutes left, so this would be a good time to get those in. So we have a question here, Jessica. The mapping that was sent was not quite readable and the zones were not clearly identified. Is there a more detailed boundary map?
I've gotten a few calls about that, and I'm not sure what was emailed out with the HOAs, but something got blurry on the map. So I've had to send a few people our version of it, which I think is a little more clear. So I'm happy to email you. I'll happy to email you a more clear version of that. It's kind of what you're seeing on your screen when I was showing the maps. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, so you can definitely get a hold of Jessica. Another way to do that is you can actually go to Thurston Geodata. So that is our Thurston County-wide mapping service that you can actually go to their website, which is geodata.org. So geodata.org, and go to one of their online maps and actually click on the zoning layer, and you can see what the zoning is for your own house. You can see what the zoning is here in the Hawks Prairie Business District, and click on individual parcels and get parcel information. It's a really handy tool, and it's quite interactive. And so I'd maybe suggest that too as another way to get additional information on zoning. So geodata.org is a good place to do that. Jessica, do you want to bring up your slide with your contact information? So not seeing any additional questions. If you have additional questions, maybe you weren't able to raise them here or have additional concerns, Jessica would be the one to reach out to. There's Jessica's email address there, jbrant@ci.lacy.wa.us. She'd be happy to get you any information that you need and answer any additional questions. As she mentioned, there is a public hearing coming up with the Planning Commission that is scheduled for April 20th. I believe that's actually at 5 o'clock. We have 4 o'clock shown on the screen there, but I believe that's a 5 o'clock meeting. So if you want to receive notice about that public hearing or testify to the Planning Commission that will be making a recommendation ultimately to the City Council on the zoning text amendment, that's the way to be able to do that. So with that, I'm not seeing any additional questions. We'd like to thank you for attending tonight, and feel free to reach out to Jessica if you have any additional questions or concerns, or feel free to attend that public hearing on April 20th. So with that, I'd like to thank our guests, Jessica Brandt, Associate Planner with the City of Lacey, and Michael Kershiznik with Thomas Architecture Studios for providing information tonight for this informational webinar. So again, thank you both, and have a good evening. Bye.
Thanks, Brian.